York City. Forget the things you've heard about the place. About the New York.
I think the Punisher is easily one of the better characters to come out of the Marvel Universe. He doesn't have super speed, super strength, or the ability to read people's minds. He's just some pissed off guy who got dealt a crappy hand in life and made the best of his abilities by violently killing criminals in the way he saw fit. The first time I ever came across the character was when I saw him on the Spider-Man cartoon series from the 1990s. Later on there was a Punisher arcade cabinet that appeared at my local shopping mall, and I can remember playing it for the first time with a friend and being really impressed at the bits where you could just pull out a gun and start shooting enemies. It was pretty damn brutal for the time. The arcade version had that typical Capcom level of quality you got from arcade games back in the 1990s. Then of course there's the hidden gem, the Punisher game, developed by Volition in 2005 and released for PlayStation 2, the Xbox, and of course Microsoft Windows. And if you've never even heard of it, well, that's fine. I mean, I think few people have. I played the demo for it way back when it first came out, and the only reason I finally ended up buying it and reviewing it was because it's the most requests I think I've ever had for a game since H-Doom. So the game opens with Frank under arrest and being held in custody at Rikers Island, interrogated by detectives John Soap and Molly Richtofen, and he begins to recount them with the events that led up to his capture.
How many people have you killed in the last few weeks?
Not sure. There were a lot of explosions.
This is comprised of a bunch of missions that take place across multiple environments with one theme in common: Frank going around and doing a whole lot of killing. What I think's really good about the Punisher is it's really packed full of fan service for people who are fans of the comics. There's cameos from Nick Fury, Iron Man, Black Widow, and Matt Murdock.
Ready?
Ladies first.
Not to mention the appearance of villains like the Kingpin, Bullseye, and the Russian, which is definitely a highlight of the whole game. I mean, just watch it, it's amazing.
You heard me, you stupid American pig!
So many of the missions in the game are just badass in concept alone, and I couldn't help but have this huge shit-eating grin across my face the entire time. Like gate crashing a mob funeral by hiding inside a coffin with a machine gun before popping out during the wake and just gunning everyone down. One of the earliest missions is just Frank walking into a bar and killing a bunch of mobsters to send a message. It's simple and it's effective. Now, the Punisher almost feels like a run-and-gun shooter. In fact, if you want to play it that way, then it works perfectly fine, at least early on. But later on, being more precise with your aiming becomes an absolute must. Late-game enemies wear body armor and can only be killed by direct headshots. Certain weapons are absolutely useless at long range with a really pathetic weapon spread, so the weapon you're using can often make the level harder or easier depending on what it is. You'll also get a better end level score from moving a bit slower, being a bit more tactical and taking your time. Frank can soak up bullets like they're droplets of rain, but every time you take a hit, the game resets your score and the multiplier. Getting a high score nets you a bronze, silver, or gold medal at the end of the level, so it's kind of in your best interest to not run into rooms blindly if you want to have a good result when the mission's over. And this is probably my only real complaint about the game. I wish it was paced a bit differently, as I think it would have felt more suitable to the character to be able to blast your way through each level, without having to instead peek around corners and take pot shots at enemies from a distance. In terms of the controls, it's basically just a standard third-person shooter. You can dodge sideways, forwards or backwards a la Max Payne, though the game doesn't go into bullet time when you do this, giving you a pretty limited window of opportunity. And later in the game against armored enemies, it's pretty much a useless mechanic. Frank does have this kind of rage mode though, where he goes ballistic for a period of time and can kill enemies in 1 or 2 hits with his knives. It reminds me a lot of the Beast mode in the Suffering games, and Frank even cuts enemies to pieces in similar fashion. Gotta say though, these moments are pretty damn fun, just going around demolishing anyone that gets in your way, and it also has the added bonus of replenishing your health along the way. There's a pretty decent roster of guns to use as well. There's pistols, revolvers, assault rifles, and submachine guns. The precision mode allows you to zoom in and go for headshots, which becomes essential against those aforementioned enemies that wear body armor later in the game. If you're close to an enemy, you can grab them and use them as a human shield, which is actually a really useful ability, because they soak up all the damage you'd normally be taking, giving you free reign to fire back on enemies without fear of being hit, mostly anyway. And this becomes one of the most useful skills later in the game, in fact, even just early on too, because you're always taking on a bunch of bad guys at once, and if you have any chance of getting a good end level score, if that's the kind of thing that matters to you, you're going to want to avoid getting shot too much. When an enemy's in your clutches, you're also able to comically throw them away like a piece of trash. You can execute them with a gun or kill them by interacting with an element in the environment. Like throw them onto an electrical power box, shove their face into a bear trap, or my personal favourite, shove them into a coffin, then lob a grenade in and slam the lid shut. Classy. But the real core of the game is the interrogation mechanic, where Frank's able to intimidate NPCs for information, with certain NPCs that have a skull above their heads giving away crucial information that's going to help you on each mission. Like it might be someone giving you the key to a weapons locker or telling you the code to unlock the way forward. Sometimes something someone says will trigger some kind of PTSD in Frank, and he'll have these short, horrific visions of the day his family was murdered.
You dig your own grave.
Some of these interrogations are really unique and also kind of entertaining, like dangling someone over the ocean as a shark circles menacingly below them. They're controlled with the mouse, usually just by moving the mouse up and down in a certain fashion depending on the interrogation method itself, like holding someone under a spinning drill or dangling them over the edge of a building. It's the highlight of the game for sure, and it's kind of amazing just how many of these they've managed to come up with. There's honestly some of them that pop up a single time in the entire game, then they just never come back again. I even found myself restarting an entire mission because I'd missed one and I wanted to see it. It's just a shame though that they're kind of broken on the PC. Apparently the controls for these are connected to your frame rate, so if you're playing at 60 FPS, which most people will be, kind of throws the timing out of whack, making them a lot harder than they're supposed to be.
Made it twice, cut once.
None of these are ever mission critical though, but it's just kind of frustrating when you bugger one of them up. Often too because some of them are used maybe once like I said and never again, so you're just not sure sometimes how hard or soft you're supposed to be moving the mouse. You actually lose points for messing them up, which is just adding insult to injury too. Frank during these moments is basically Jason Voorhees. I mean, they're the kind of kills you'd see in those Friday the 13th movies, except imagine that every time right before Jason killed someone, he'd stop at the last second. The funny part is though that after you've completed an interrogation, you can still shoot the enemy without any penalty. Getting information from someone you're holding over a vat of boiling oil and then plunging their face into that oil afterwards should be rewarded, not penalised. I mean, it's the Punisher after all. It's also a pretty damn violent game. Not only are you killing dozens and dozens of bad guys, which leaves the environments covered with blood and guts, but some of the interrogation methods can end in truly horrific fashion if you mess them up. Australia got cucked again with the release of this game, and apparently a couple of the scenes were removed from the game entirely. Now, I got my version from the US, so I don't think it's something I have to worry about, but there still is a patch online that apparently increases the overall gore, and removes a black and white filter during the interrogation scenes. Considering YouTube seems to remove videos for the most petty reasons these days though, I'm a bit hesitant about using it and showing that kind of footage. Regardless of the version you're playing though, the violence is high and the carnage is ever present, which is a good thing. So what didn't I like about this game? Well, honestly, that list is about as short as the list of people Frank doesn't kill. There's a mission about halfway through the game where you're moving through this tanker, hunting down Russians and trying to recover a stolen nuke, and putting a stop to a human trafficking ring. All in a day's work, huh? But it's just this long slog through this gauntlet of enemies that just goes on, and it shows how shoddy the shooting mechanics can be in close quarters. Turns out that fat people can apparently take more bullets than skinny people because the enemies in this game that are overweight seem to soak up more damage before dying. I mean, I know it's a gameplay mechanic and all that, but it's still stupid. One thing that becomes pretty evident is that this is a console game first and foremost. I mean, it came out in 2004, and if you compare it to other console games from the same time, it looks fine. But compare it to any other PC games from around that same time, and it looks like garbage. I mean, Max Payne 2 came out a couple of years prior, and look how that looks in comparison. It's also kind of evident by the complete lack of visual options in the game's menu and the fact that there's no quick saves. You have to replay the little mission sections over and over if you're killed. Thankfully though, Frank himself has been modelled really well to look like his comic book counterpart, which is all that really matters. There's a decent amount of detail in the environments considering the time the game came out, and animations across the board are pretty decent.
Get out of the way.
I had no real issues running the game in Windows 7, though I did have to install a patch to get it working in widescreen, which messed up the main menu a bit, preventing me from choosing a weapon loadout before each mission. Overall though, it runs pretty well, which for a console port from that time period is just a godsend.
Damn it, Castle. This was my favorite bar.
It's hard not to make comparisons to the Max Payne games considering the subject matter, and there's a fair few instances where both games feel very similar. They both take place in New York City. They both have a level set at the docks, they have a level set at a Mafia mansion, and later on you even get the option to team up with the mob as you temporarily help them kill a bunch of Yakuza. Similar to how Max teamed up with the mob in the second game and took on the Russians. Not to mention both games begin with a protagonist under arrest and most of the game takes place in the past, with Frank retelling the events of the past couple of days, similar to how Max did this in the first game. It's a funny thing too, because I don't think Max Payne would have existed without the Punisher in the first place, but now I don't think the Punisher game would exist without Max Payne either. It's funny how things work out. Getting my hands on this game wasn't hard, but it sure as shit was expensive. I got a copy off eBay for $100, shipping included, which is just ludicrous. Seems most people who played it agree it was one of a kind, which is kind of funny because outside of the interrogation mechanic, it really doesn't do anything all that new or amazing. Just a fairly competent shooter with some interesting mechanics and a protagonist that's hard not to like. And when you add in lots of dark humor, fan service, and plenty of people to kill, it ends up being a damn good time. $100, money well spent.
До свидания.